Ilara Voss had learned, long ago, that survival meant making herself small. In the Moon Hollow pack, being small kept her safe from notice, and notice was never kind to her. Her father had died protecting the pack borders when she was 12, a sacrifice everyone spoke of with solemn nods during the anniversary bonfires, and then forgot the rest of the year. His daughter, meanwhile, was left to grow up on the outer edge of pack life, tolerated but never truly welcomed, a reminder of a debt no one wanted to pay. She worked in the healing house most days, wrapping wounds and grinding herbs, because it was quiet work, and it kept her away from the pack hall, where the strongest wolves gathered to trade boasts and plan hunts. She did not mind the quiet. She had grown used to it the way a person grows used to a coat that no longer fits, but is the only one they own. It was on an ordinary afternoon, with the smell of crushed mint still on her hands, that the pack elders called her before them and told her she had been matched. Corin, the Alpha's beta, stood at the front of the hall when she arrived, his arms crossed, his expression already smug, as though the matter had been decided before she ever walked in. The elders explained, in careful, official words, that the moon spirits had chosen him as her fated mate. It was, they said, a great honor. It would bring stability to the pack. It would settle certain old debts. Ilara understood immediately that this had nothing to do with fate and everything to do with politics. Corin's own intended match had fallen through months earlier, and the elders needed a way to keep him tied loyally to Alpha Draven's inner circle. A poor, quiet Omega with no family to object would do the job nicely. She waited for the bond to tell her otherwise. She had heard others describe it, a pull in the chest, a warmth, a sense of rightness. She felt none of it. Standing 3 feet from Corin, all she felt was a cold, hollow wrongness, like standing too close to a stranger who had been given permission to stand too close to her. "I don't feel the bond," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, I can't accept this." The hall went silent. Corin's face changed from smugness to fury in the space of a breath. He was not a wolf who had ever been refused anything, and certainly not by someone as far beneath him as Ilara. He turned to Alpha Draven, demanding that something be done, that her defiance not be allowed to stand as an example to others. Draven, who had never liked being reminded of the debt his pack owed Ilara's father, saw an easy way to be rid of an old obligation and please his beta at the same time. He did not hesitate long. "She has rejected the match chosen for her by the elders," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. "She has shown herself unwilling to serve this pack's future. Let her find a pack more suited to her defiance. Ilara Voss is banished from Moon Hollow territory, effective at sundown." There were a few gasps, a few uncomfortable glances exchanged among the healers who had worked beside her for years, but no one spoke in her defense. No one ever did. She was given an hour to gather her things. She walked out of Moon Hollow territory as the sun dropped behind the tree line, carrying a small bag with a blanket, a knife, and what dried food she could find. She did not cry. She had promised herself long ago that Moon Hollow would never see her cry, and she intended to keep that promise even now, with her back to the only home she had ever known. The neutral forest beyond the border was a different world. The trees grew closer together, the shadows thicker, and every pack knew that rogue wolves wandered here, wolves who had no territory and no laws to answer to. Ilara walked until her legs ached and the light was nearly gone, telling herself that exhaustion was better than fear, because at least exhaustion she understood. She did not know how long she had been walking when her strength finally gave out. Her knees buckled near a stream, and she went down hard against the cold earth, too tired even to feel afraid anymore. She thought, distantly, that this might be how it ended, not with claws or fangs, but simply with a girl too tired to stand back up. Then she heard footsteps, many footsteps, moving with the quiet discipline of trained wolves, not the careless prowling of rogues. She tried to lift her head and failed. A voice cut through the fog in her mind, low and sharp with command. "Hold!" The footsteps stopped instantly. Ilara felt herself being turned gently onto her back, and then everything in her chest seemed to catch fire at once. Not pain, but recognition, deep and undeniable. The exact feeling every story had ever promised her, and Corin had never given her. She opened her eyes to find a man kneeling over her, broad-shouldered and dressed like no one she had ever seen in Moon Hollow, his clothes marked with a crest she did not recognize. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch even through her exhaustion. "You're mine," he said, quietly, almost disbelieving. Behind him, several wolves in matching armor went utterly still, exchanging glances that told Alara this was not a small thing to witness. "Who?" she managed, before her strength failed her completely, and the world went dark. She woke in a bed softer than anything she had ever known, in a room with high stone windows and morning light spilling gently across the floor. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it all, that she would open the door and find herself back in the healing house, grinding mint with careful, practiced hands. Instead, when she pushed herself upright, she found a young woman waiting nearby, who introduced herself as Mira, one of the palace healers. Mira explained, with the careful patience of someone delivering enormous news to a person not yet ready for it, that Alara was in the stronghold of the Ashgrove Dominion, and that the man who had found her in the forest was King Kale Ashgrove, ruler of the most powerful territory in the northern lands. "He carried you here himself," Mira said. "Didn't let anyone else touch you the whole way back. Hasn't left the corridor outside your door since." Alara did not know what to say to that. She was still turning the king's name over in her mind, trying to make it fit beside the memory of his eyes finding hers in the dark, when the door opened and he stepped inside. He looked different in daylight, less like a storm and more like a man, though the intensity in his gaze had not softened at all. He crossed the room slowly, as though afraid too much speed might frighten her, and knelt beside the bed so they were closer to eye level. "I know this is a great deal to take in," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise, but I need you to know that whatever brought you to that forest, whatever happened before, you are safe here. No one will banish you again, not while I live." "You don't know me," Alara said, her voice smaller than she intended. "I know what I felt the moment I found you," he answered simply. "I have ruled this territory for 6 years. I have been offered daughters of every noble house in the north, and I have refused every single one, because I felt nothing. What I felt for you, in the space of a single breath, was more than all of that combined times over. I am not a man who acts without certainty, Alara. I am certain." She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that certainty had betrayed her before, that fate itself had once pointed her toward a man who made her skin crawl. But when Kale reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to refuse, and rested his hand near hers on the blanket, the warmth that spread through her was unlike anything Corin had ever managed to produce. It was not overwhelming. It was simply, quietly right. Over the following days, Alara began to understand what kind of man Kale truly was. He did not rush her. He did not demand that she accept the bond immediately, though she could see in his eyes how much he wanted to. Instead, he had her wounds properly tended, assigned a guard for her comfort rather than her confinement, and made time each evening to sit with her, asking about her life, her father, the healing work she loved, listening as though every detail mattered. His advisors were less patient than he was. Word spread quickly through the Ashgrove court that the king had claimed a banished Omega with no family and no standing, and the whispers were not always kind. Alara heard them in the corridors, felt the weight of judgmental stares from nobles who believed a queen should come from wealth and pedigree, not from a healing house on the edge of a lesser pack. Kale addressed the whispers directly, and without patience for them. In a court gathering, he stood before his advisors and told them plainly that he had waited longer than any of them for a true mate, that he had turned away every match offered by ambition and greed, and that he would not be lectured on worthiness by wolves who had never once felt what he felt the moment he found Alara in that forest. The whispers did not vanish entirely, but they grew quieter after that, tempered by the unmistakable authority in his voice. Alara, for her part, found herself slowly unclenching, the way a hand slowly opens after being closed too tight for too long. She began to walk the gardens without flinching at every sound. She began to laugh, quietly at first, at something Kale said during one of their evening talks, and the sound surprised her almost as much as it seemed to please him. Then word reached the Ashgrove court of what had happened to the woman Moon Hollow discarded. Alpha Draven and Corin arrived within the month, dressed in their finest, faces arranged into expressions of concern and apology that did not reach their eyes. They claimed, before Kael's assembled court, that Alara had been taken from them against her will, that they had been searching desperately for their missing pack member, that surely this was all some grave misunderstanding. Kael allowed them to speak. He allowed them every word, watching with a stillness that unsettled even his own advisors, until Draven and Corin had said quite enough to hang themselves with their own lies. Then he turned to Alara and asked her, gently, to tell the court what had truly happened. She stood, her voice steadier than she expected, and told them everything: the forced match, her honest refusal, the cold announcement of her banishment at sundown, the hour she was given to gather her life into a single bag. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The truth, spoken plainly, was enough to turn the color from several noble faces in the room. Corin, cornered and humiliated a second time, made one final desperate attempt, invoking an old pack law that claimed a contested mate bond could be challenged and proven through combat. Kael's expression did not change, but the air in the room seemed to grow colder. "There is no need for combat," he said quietly. "The bond does not require your permission to be real, Corin. It only requires the truth." He held out his hand to Alara. She crossed the room and took it without hesitation, and the mark that had formed on her shoulder in the days since the forest began to glow softly, unmistakably, in answer to his touch. No forced match, no false claim, could ever have produced such a thing. The room fell utterly silent. Kael did not raise Moonhollow, though many in his court urged him to. Instead, he simply withdrew every promise of protection and alliance the Dominion had ever extended to Draven's pack, leaving them to stand alone, against a world that Kael's territory had always quietly shielded them from. It was not vengeance, he told Alara later. It was simply the truth of consequences, allowed to run its natural course. In the weeks that followed, the Ashgrove court prepared for a coronation unlike any it had seen before. Alara stood at its center, not as the girl who had once been banished for refusing a bond that was never truly hers, but as a woman finally seen for exactly who she was. On the morning of her coronation, she stood on the palace balcony beside Kael, the sun rising slowly over a kingdom that, for the first time in her life, felt entirely like home. He took her hand, and though the crowd below cheered his name and hers together, it was his quiet words beside her that she would remember longest. "You were never the one who was unworthy," he said. "That pack simply was never yours to belong to." Far to the north, in a smaller territory whose fires now burned low and undefended, word of the coronation traveled slowly, carried by traders and wandering wolves who spoke of a king who had knelt in the dirt for an Omega no one else had wanted, and called her, without a moment's doubt, his queen.